Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Welcome back to the third and final day of Streaming Media Connect 2025. I'm Steve Nathans Kelly, editor of Streaming Media and the chair of Streaming Media Connect. And it's my privilege to welcome you to Highlights First, Gen AI, Gen Z, and Next Gen Sports Streaming. We got a great panel, and we'll get started in just a moment. First, a few housekeeping notes. The first person to identify the artist and the track that you were hearing as we came in today will win a $50 gift card from Amazon. We'll give that away at the end of the session, and you must be present to win. The chat is open, so please chat in the chat. And then if you have questions for the panel, put them in the Q&A box. That way they won't scroll away, and we'll be able to see them when we get to Q&A from the audience at the end of the session. Sessions from all 3 days of Streaming Media Connect are already appearing on the Streaming Media YouTube channel. The link for that is in the chat. We will be back live and in person in Santa Monica, October 6th to 8th for Streaming Media 2025. The program is already online, and you can check out what the sessions will be. Registration is open, and also the call for speakers is open. So even though the program is pretty well set, if you're interested in speaking and you see a topic or you have an area of expertise you want to share for us, we'll see if we can find a place for you in the program. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage John Giegengack from Hub Entertainment Research. Welcome, John.
Hey, Steve. How's it going?
Good to see you. Take it away.
Good to see you too. Sounds good. Thanks everybody for tuning in today. I'm really excited for this panel and for this topic in particular. Sports and Gen Z are two of the topics that we've been covering the most here at Hub, because they're both sort of transformational topics in the world of streaming media, which is already disrupting legacy media in ways that we've never seen before. But we have a distinguished panel of experts, each with a little bit different point of view on this topic. So right now I'd like to just welcome our panel: Joe Caporoso, Darcy Lorincz, Matt Stagg, and Michelle Augusta. And just before we begin, I thought we'd go around and just do a quick introduction for each of you, maybe take about 10 seconds and just talk a little bit about your job, your company, and your interest in the sports world. And Joe, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I'm Joe Caporoso. I'm the president of Team Whistle. We're a DAZN group company, as we were acquired a few years ago. Lead our overall strategy on sales, social content, and how we monetize that and work within the broader DAZN ecosystem to create awareness around their live rights.
And Darcy, how about you?
Good morning. I'm Darcy Lorincz. I'm president of WTFast and the Fiber Gaming Network. Our goal and vision is to give every gamer in the world a high-performance network so their experiences are awesome during gameplay and during streaming. And 30 years of streaming, bringing that experience into this new business.
Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Stagg. I'm the founder of MTech Sport, a consultancy that works with broadcasters, clubs, federations, looking at how we can use new technology to increase fan engagement and work on ways of basically using the new technology for new creative opportunities for storytelling.
And last but not least, my friend Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Michelle Augusti. I am the Global Media Insights team leader at the NBA, National Basketball Association, World Premier Basketball League. And basically, we deal with viewership, Nielsen ratings, cross-platform ratings, anything that shows and measures our performance across any cross-platform viewership falls under my purview. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for being here. And I wanted to start off our discussion just kind of setting the stage a little bit. One of the topics in the title of this panel is sports. And sports is interesting for lots of reasons, but right now I think one of the most interesting is that even as the TV industry is going through this painful contraction, sports is an area where the rights keep getting more expensive. Viewership for sports continues to rise. And I'd like to hear, just address this to the entire panel. What sports have always been around. So why is it that they are so hot right now, and they're kind of bucking, some of the larger trends going on in the industry?
I could jump in. I would say sports currently right now is really the last premium live content that is driving audiences and value for both traditional television and streaming platforms. Sports, I would say, along with news, is what's keeping TV alive, especially cable. We're seeing people continue to cut the cord. We see fewer people watching television. However, sports viewership is actually on the rise. And in 2023, of the top 100 programs on television, sports made up 96 of the top 100. That number went down slightly in 2024 to around 80 something due to it being an election year. But we do foresee sports continue to dominate the overall TV landscape again in 2025. And I mean, to be honest, it's really the only genre that is truly appointment viewing, and it brings in the most engaged eyeballs. And as a result, it's premium content that attracts both the demand of both advertisers and viewers. And it's really one of only the few genres where we're seeing the CPMs continue to rise.
Yeah, I agree.
Matt,
I was going to say that, in terms of having something that is still appointment viewing for a wide audience, that is starting to feel more and more just siloed to sports at this point. It's just less common to see it in other areas. I also think you're seeing just a more wide expansion of international opportunities and distribution, and countries hosting some games that have been more predominantly US based. You're seeing games get more global. You're also seeing a rise of more niche sports leagues that are trying different things, that are giving more options for viewership and distribution. So there's just a wider range of options to pick from. And it feels like there's been just a spike up in new audiences, new sports, and general globalization in recent months.
Would you guys, I have a couple theories here of my own of why they're becoming more valuable. And one is to do with sort of the content itself. So there's more content today than there's ever been before, and the quality is higher. But every streaming platform, for instance, now has buzzy original dramas that are exclusive to one platform. So they're impressive, but they're no longer unique the way they used to be. But sports is, I'd make the case that it's almost the last truly unique content left. So if you want to watch Breaking Bad, but you don't have that platform, there's some other expensive drama you can see. But if you want to watch the NBA, or you want to watch the Philadelphia Eagles, or if you want to watch the Premier League, there's no other alternative. And we found that about 80%, in our studies, about 80% of avid fans of a particular league say that if they needed a new subscription to watch that league, they would definitely sign up for it. So do you think that would you guys say that the value of sports is partly increasing just because of all the competition between these platforms to get and keep viewers?
I think there's a couple of, I agree with that. I think there's a couple of other reasons and things we haven't seen before. And you take Formula One and Drive to Survive.
Yeah.
That Formula One now has so many people who would have never, ever been interested in it. Oh, it's motorsports. Once they were drawn into that documentary, they became not, oh, it's on, I'll have a watch. They understood the people involved. They were invested. There was a story behind it. It wasn't just cars racing. And we've not seen stuff, and we're seeing that through all sports now. And I think that's good. And that actually comes on to some of the new engagement tactics that we'll probably be talking about later on.
I also think the political climate plays a role in this. I think, everything's so dark and dreary. And I think for sports, it provides escapism, and for like 2.5 hours of your day, you don't have to worry about what's going on in the world. All you have to do is worry about what's going on in the court. And, the roller coaster of emotions, as much stressful as it could be, like last night, it's still
I'm feeling pretty dreary as a Knicks fan right now.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a fun roller coaster to be on, right? Like, yeah, you might want to get off the ride because it's causing you pain and stress and turmoil. But at the end of the day, it's actually a fun ride of emotions. And I would take that over anything else that's going on in the world right now. And I think, I think basically people are really coming towards sports just to have that break from reality.
That's a great, sorry, Matt, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to agree. That's a really good point, and it yeah, it certainly works for me watching something on the sport.
But Michelle, you reminded me of the other reason I think that sports are kind of bucking the trend, is that they're super expensive, but they're also a safe bet in terms of the fact that they're predictable. If you look at Netflix with that 10-year deal, 500 million a year for WWE, which we'll classify as a sport for purposes of this conversation. But if you look at, so they spent $166 million on Rebel Moon, the Zack Snyder sci-fi, 2-part movie, which is a pretty reasonable price tag for, a sci-fi movie like that. But that's only 4 hours of content. It got, something like 22% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Not a lot of people watched it, we assume. If you look at the WWE, it's 500 million a year, but it's 150 hours of content. It's on every week, and nobody decides if they're going to watch the NFL playoffs or if they're going to watch WWE or if they're going to watch the NBA. They don't go to Rotten Tomatoes first. They just turn up. And so there's a hugely predictable and big audience every time, and you're not kind of rolling the dice the way you do with some kinds of scripted content. Do you guys think that that's among the reasons that sports are becoming more valuable? And do you think that's something that can kind of be depended upon for like niche sports, as Joe mentioned, as much as it can for like big leagues like the NBA or NFL?
I think I'd just throw something out there around the niche sports is the availability and the ease in which you can get to content. And certainly from a niche sports perspective, I've been very interested in looking at the sort of democratization of broadcasting. To get a broadcast out of a niche sport was extremely expensive. You'd have to try and get it onto somebody's platform. Now you can put up a 5G camera, cloud-based production, get it out onto a YouTube channel. The coach can do the editing, and then even if you've only got 1,000 interested people, they're able to see that and they're able to engage in that. And actually, they're probably more willing to pay for that kind of content because they're so invested in that niche sport. So I think we'll see a real rise in that as technology enables a lot lower entry cost.
That's a good segue to niche is gaming. There's about 1,000 popular games that between Twitch, the 23 billion hours that were consumed last year on Twitch and the 2.27 billion on YouTube gaming, that's all niche stuff. And those are all communities and tribes and whatever you want to call them that gather around these games. And I guess I put an E in front of sports because that's what they're watching. They're watching competitions. They're watching people compete in games. A lot of them are sports games, by the way, and sports games are very popular during these playoff seasons. Right now, NHL and NBA games are, off the chart with usage, and those are, that's the crossover. But ultimately, when you talked about earlier, how many hours you had to produce to get this many people, and obviously sports and other media are very different in terms of the costs and, unscripted versus scripted. Gaming's all unscripted. Anything can happen in a game match, and anybody can produce as long as you have, you're good at what you do and you've got some decent connectivity. And like you said, a studio in a box, you can create an audience, and it doesn't have to be those millions. Most of them are, 1 to 10,000, and that's what makes up, the billions of hours on Twitch and YouTube gaming. And that's where the Gen Z audience is, by the way. So if you're not over there too, then you're going to miss a big opportunity to drag them into your normal, broadcast or stream for your sports.
That's the second part of our panel title, is looking at Gen Z. And this is a topic I'm really excited to cover. We spend a lot. In fact, we have one study that's just dedicated to tracking how Gen Z consumes entertainment content and TV and everything else. And I don't have to tell you guys that there are a lot of fundamental differences. They spend more time watching short form social video, and they spend more time on video games than they do watching traditional scripted television. So, you know, I'd like to hear from the group here. Are Gen Z people, are they just as big sports fans as their older counterparts? And if they are, what are the most important things that you have to do to adapt to the ways that they consume media in your experience? And Joe, I know that I think you have some thoughts on this, and Michelle too, but would love to hear from everybody.
So I do think they are as big as sport fans as previous generations. I think they just maybe approach it a little bit in a different way. I think there is more of an interest in directly following players and personalities versus teams and some of the traditional like stats and news and scores that you would follow. So maybe you're not a huge diehard Jets fan who knows every box score, but you're a fan of an individual player, an individual quarterback in the NBA. You're a Steph Curry or a LeBron fan or a Luka fan, and you're going to follow him wherever he goes more so than your team. Or even you're just going to be that much more interested in sort of the full 360-degree storylines in life of athletes and people adjacent to athletes beyond just watching all the direct games. That doesn't mean that you're not going to engage with the live components of it. It just means that there's a wider opportunity to maintain that audience's interest and also accept the reality that a lot of times the live game could be second screen viewing for them. They're going to be scrolling through their phone. They could be watching a different version of it on an altcast. And I think you've seen, a lot of rights holders sort of lean into the opportunity there. I just think it's a different style, a little bit of sports consumption. And there's a bit of a wider interest beyond just sort of the direct nitty gritty stuff that happens on the court or on the field.
I think what Joe just said is a perfect connection between gamers and real sports. When they play games, they can draft their own team from a whole bunch of teams and create this dream team on the game. And a lot of the games allow that. And all of a sudden now that person's watching 10 games because they've got 10 players that they're trying to keep track of, that in these games keep track of real-time stats. So how they perform in the real world, ultimately makes its way into the game. So it's very interesting to watch that kind of behavior. We see, streams popping up for a game, and then all of a sudden they're watching, the real sport. And again, back to the playoff times, everybody's watching two things. They're multitasking. These are multimodal multitaskers, and they'll watch TV and play a game at the same time, or watch a stream of a game and a stream of an esport all at the same time. And that's what's exciting. You just have to figure out how to, what's the magic of getting those two experiences together for them. And then you've got, a decent connection for longer than the game lasts. I mean, they're playing the games for hours and hours and hours and hours, and they're in your brand. So you should figure out how to get to them.
Yeah, I would agree with both Joe and Darcy. I would even say and take it a little bit further and say maybe Gen Z or even maybe bigger sports fans than the older generation, because I would say sports is more integrated in their lives, where we see for the older viewers, I think there's more of a separation.
Yeah.
I think the older viewers, you watch the game, you might watch a post or pre-show, you might read about it, and I think that's it. Where I think the younger generation, Gen Z, I mean, they're looking, to Joe's point, following the players, on social media, following the league, betting, doing fantasy sports, gaming, and it's just so much more integrated in their lives that I think it plays a much bigger role in their lives compared to their older counterparts. And at the NBA, I think we recognize how important this audience is. I mean, they're our future. So as a result, like, we had to change our strategies regarding content distribution and marketing. So for distribution, I think we were one of the last few sports leagues to solely be on traditional TV. And I think the approach that we took originally was that we're going to have majority of our games on traditional TV and then have a select few on streaming. And in our new media deal, we decided to completely change the paradigm and actually flip it on its head, where we're having majority of the games available on streaming with a select few on traditional TV. And the reason why is that we want to be everywhere where our fans are. And we know, like I said, we know Gen Z is the future, so we want to be where they are. So we're making sure that the majority, if not all of our games, are available on streaming services. and then still have all the biggest games still on traditional TV. So you're not only getting your older audience, but you're getting your younger audience. And then regarding marketing strategies, we still use traditional TV to speak to our more traditional viewers. I don't want to call them older because I don't want to be an ageist. So we'll just say our traditional viewers, but in order to reach our Gen Z viewers, we're actually reaching out to them through the app, through League Pass, and creating that more personalized experience to kind of bring them into the ecosystem and and form a stronger connection with them so they resonate more with our brand.
From a European perspective, and I know US sports, but I work more in Europe, there's certainly been, from a traditional broadcaster's perspective, a certain type of arrogance when it comes to Gen Z, or Z, in America. So, and it's what's wrong. It starts from what's wrong with Gen Z and explaining why they're not watching their traditional content. So it's the myth of short attention spans. Well, Darcy's just explained the attention span of being hours. And they haven't lost interest with sport. They've lost interest with how they engage in it. And they don't reject content. They reject content that they see as irrelevant, and they're forensic in looking at whether something is specifically for them. And they want authenticity. They want, reliable voices from creators and people that they understand, and influencers, and part of their communities are a lot more tribal with social media and interaction, and lots of it being online. And people, they're waking up, but the first thing that broadcasters used to say is, okay, well, short attention span, we'll send out more highlights. Oh, we'll change it so it's a vertical because people like to watch it on their phone, and eventually they'll grow into our way of doing things. And it's starting to be, it should be flipped on its head and said, okay, what are we doing wrong that people we know still like sport aren't watching and aren't engaging with our platforms? We're seeing some change, but certainly in Europe, I think we have been behind the US on that.
And Matt, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Matt. Sorry. So Matt, I totally agree with you. And I think one thing that we've been seeing for the NBA is that if you have good content, if you give them a reason to come, they will come. So we've been seeing for our playoffs, Christmas Day, opening night, we've been seeing the biggest gains that we have experienced is among Gen Z. And so, yeah, I agree. Like, everyone thinks their attention span is much shorter compared to the older generations, but if there's a reason for them to come, they will come, and they will come in droves. And I know for the NBA, our viewing levels are twice the amount, twice as high as their overall TV viewing levels among Gen Z.
And we've seen that too in our research, Michelle, that of all the major sports, NBA fans are the most ingrained in getting content from social media. They're also the most likely to say that they would switch to a streaming platform because they're comfortable with them already if they needed one in order to watch. But it's not just as easy as taking content and like jamming it onto a phone or jamming it onto the internet. In our experience, some companies have done that and they've kind of, failed pretty hard. But the NBA has done a really good job at creating content, specifically for that environment. Joe, your company builds content, especially for people to consume that way. I wonder if, I'd love to hear from any of you, maybe you two guys first, but what are the most important things when you think about packaging your content in a way that will be natural for Gen Z people to consume it, that they'll want to show up, as opposed to just taking the stuff that's on TV and just porting it to another smaller, different shaped screen?
I think it has to feel native and optimized to the specific platform it's going on. You can't just kind of cut and paste the exact same segment on TikTok, on Instagram, on Snapchat, on YouTube, on Meta, or wherever you're putting it. I think each platform has its own nuances and its own way to edit and its own personalities to amplify the content.
Can you give a couple just like examples of what you mean by that? Because in case people in the audience don't know, or I don't even know all of that myself, and it's really interesting.
Sure. I mean, look, even if you just use a place like YouTube, you have to be able to verticalize clips that are 3 minutes or less for shorts and to take advantage of the distribution there. And then you have to be able to also find creative ways to package up videos horizontally that are longer than 3 minutes that are going to enhance your watch time and take advantage of sort of the sit back viewing. And maybe the short that you're using is going to have an influencer speaking over the highlights in some capacity and sharing it to help bring their audience to it. Another kind of way you could also package that on Instagram and TikTok, and whoever you're sort of utilizing or using to help boost your post in any capacity. Different people have different scaled audiences on each of the platforms. So I just think that there's going to be a mix of vertical clips you're going to use, horizontal clips you're going to use. Some of them are just going to be straight game footage, but others need to be edited in a creative way that add your own voice and personality to it, because you do, of course, need to make authentic content that's going to resonate with the audience. But the first step and kind of table stakes is you have to look at the different trends on the platform, see what is clicking in other comparable areas to what you're doing, and try to utilize that versus just thinking a one size fits all. So a lot of it happens sort of at the post-production level, and also the kind of individuals you're going to engage with to speak over your content, share your content, amplify your content in the main, 4 or 5 social platforms that you're going to prioritize.
And Matt, when we were talking about this in the pre-call, and one of you said something really interesting, or had an example that made me think about this even harder, but talking about having sports where you can kind of overlay your announcer of choice. So kind of like the Manning Bowl, where they have Peyton and his brother commentating on NFL games. But you were talking about how people, I forget which sport it was, but having like a choice.
Yes.
You could have
the Baller League is come out, and specifically, basically the things we've talked about, they've done from the ground up. So, the president is KSI. They've got lots of influencers managing the team, as well as, ex-Premier League footballers. So it's a real mix there, and it's a 6-a-side. They're really quick games, and there's a lot of interaction, and you can influence, like the last 3 minutes, they have power plays or different, types. So it can go to 3-on-3. And that gets a lot more engagement, and it's built around that tribal engagement. And if you're really following your teams, there's a lot of content about those teams, but all in the wrap of the league, which is unusual, because there's a real integration of the teams into the league, into the federation, and it is built with interactivity, authenticity. They will have a variety of different, as I said, you have influencers, or you have new creatives, you'll have athletes. So there's always something for someone to not just engage with that isn't just, that's the best team, or that's the team my dad liked, so that's the team I'll like. And I'm a Liverpool fan because my dad was a Liverpool fan, and I hadn't been to Liverpool match until I was about 20 anyway. So I think there's some really interesting things that are coming out that traditional sports and broadcasters can learn from, to see, how you get that engagement.
Yeah, and everything you guys have said strikes me as really interesting, because in the world of scripted content, all of this competition from social and from streaming is more bad than good, because you're going to consume in one or the other. The day's still only 24 hours long, and a minute spent here can't be spent somewhere else. But with sports, it seems like it's creating so many new ways to engage with people that to me, it seems like the advantages outweigh the challenges to the traditional business model. You lose that kind of traditional linear TV audience, or some of them, but you gain all of these other ways to not only capture their attention, but brand new ways to interact with them and kind of build that relationship. Darcy, one thing that we talked about on the pre-call that really struck me, and I was hoping maybe you could describe it here, in the sim racing for F1, if you could talk a little bit about what you told us about the interactivity, the opportunities to kind of engage people with the real sport and the real athletes, while they're racing. I thought that was a really interesting example.
Yeah, and I think most sports should take a page out of that playbook. If there's a sport that doesn't have a game, let me know. They're everywhere. And this new thing called AI that everybody, now calls what machine learning was for all this time, gives you opportunities in real time to connect what's going on in the sport to the game. And actually, from the sim racing perspective, you can get in, whatever your setup is in your room and race against real racers. And to the point where now during the real race, you can race against these ghost images of what's going on in the real race inside of your game. That is, for the first time where anybody can participate in the sport, whether, the racers don't know you're there. And actually that's something that's happened in Formula E where the crowd boosts you get more boost for your car because you got social media engagement. I mean, that's really cool stuff, right? So that's how you get them. You got to figure out what they're doing in the game that is representative of your sport and figure out how you connect those dots. In racing, it's very intimate. You're in the cockpit, you're at home watching the race on one screen and you're racing against those people that are in that race on another screen, and you feel like you're in it and you're participating, not just passively watching, which is the key. And I think somebody said earlier, but between the generations, that's the difference. Linear people lean back and watch linear and they don't interact, and that's okay. You got to still serve them. This new generation, they want to be in it. They want to be part of it. Sim racing is probably the best example of real time being in the race, racing against these people. You might even be better than them. And, the whole thing that we did for years, bringing racers and, from gaming community to become real racers was proof of that. Millions of people tried to be that person and they didn't take the traditional route to becoming the racer. I think the same things happen in a lot of sports. People are learning or getting their interest in that sport initially from just being in the game. And so if you can connect more real time what's going on in your sport, like in the playoffs, like let them play against the real team. I've seen some examples of that in some sports and just little snippets of, you be able to be in the game and you're that player and your character is over top of it. That's cool for kids. They love that stuff. And when I say kids, 18 to 45-year-olds, right? They want that. That's, if you can get that magic, then that attention that they have for that whatever hours of the day they're awake, you can gain more of that back to yourself because you're more relevant in more mediums than just the linear medium or the streaming medium.
I completely agree with you, Darcy. I think the one challenge that we have as a league, as the definition of fandom changes, is how do you measure that? Like, how do you gauge how do you measure how engaged people are in your brand and how many people are engaged with your brand? Because right now, from a viewership point of view, we're only able to kind of measure the linear component, somewhat the social component, and somewhat the digital component, but really kind of aggregating all that together and be able to deduplicate and be able to sit there and say, on an average day, 10 million people engage with the NBA brand. This is a challenge that we have. And this is something that we're working towards to try to really kind of capture and measure engagement across all platforms and anything and any kind of engagement to any touch point into the NBA ecosystem.
Games and digital are the easiest place to measure if you know what you're looking for because it's real time and it's data all the time. And if you want to find out who's playing NBA 2K right now, just go look at all the servers that serve up the games, these millions of kids that are playing. You're going to find out what team they're playing, what players they're playing, what they're doing. And if you listen to Discord, just do one more thing. Listen to the Discord around that game. You'll learn all kinds of things in real time about what the audience is doing during the playoffs, during regular season, during the off time, whatever it is. So you guys have a great advantage because you are the league. You got the rights. You give the rights to some publisher to make a game about your stuff. You need to be more involved in that and not just passively throwing your rights over the fence to the game publisher.
No, I totally understand. And I wish all the other platforms were as easy as the gaming, because unfortunately, not all the platforms, the measurement is not consistent across the board. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have is aggregating together.
When you say easier, what's easier about the game platforms specifically?
Well, he was saying that the measurement, you can understand what's going on, who's watching, which teams they're playing. For betting, we don't really get that detailed into the data, even for social media, like it's only so much that we can know. We can't even really know like demographic data and understanding who's actually engaging on our with our players, our platform, our league and our platforms. And so when you look at all the different touch points into our ecosystems, it's really kind of hard to kind of get consistent measurement across all of them.
We measure what's going on leading up into we'll say the playoffs, and you can see the groundswell and the wave coming of people playing more and more and more and more, and then going crazy during March Madness or NBA playoffs or NHL, whatever it is. So there's some magic in all that measurement, and games, it already provides that to you. So you almost don't have to worry about it. You just have to figure out how to yield that data into your systems to find out where these groundswells coming from and how you get the game attached to them. And I love what, sports are doing. You can follow players around now. You can click on them and find out, more about them and during the real game. That's a gamified experience, and that technology comes out of games. So there's definitely fabric there to connect it. And I think sports needs to spend more time on understanding that connectivity and that data and figuring out how to, put them together in the magic to figure out how to get more viewers and more sponsors and advertisers.
You raise a great point there, Darcy, because kind of using technology to like enhance the sports experience. I think there's, and AI in particular is the other topic of our panel, but I think whenever there's new technology that comes out, everybody's in a rush to use it, and there's a tendency to kind of conflate things that technologically you can do with things that you should do. And in sports, especially where people are really protective of the experience, that sometimes runs awry. If you think about, all the money that ESPN put into their 3D studio that ended up being kind of a flash in the pan, or the NHL's, the meteor puck back in the 90s or whenever that was, that kind of aggravated people. How do you, what are the principles maybe for coming up with a way to apply AI that's going to enhance the viewer's experience, but without kind of getting in the way of it? Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
I think one thing, and it's not spoke about very much, but quite often there's a disconnect between the creatives and the technologists, because yes, it's great, and we can go and say, okay, we use AI and we can give you all of this information, and we can do this, and we can put cloud-based, and actually they leave creatives out of it, and they give them a load more tools so they can do whatever they want without consultation. Not everywhere. And what happens then, creatives actually want less tools because they want to be creative, and they, I think we need to be very careful and have that discussion between the different sides, editorial, product, and technology, to make sure we get that balance. Because as soon as you say to someone, yeah, we'll implement AI, we can give you everything. Well, what does that mean? Oh, you can do anything you want. It's just too overwhelming, and things get diluted, and actually you end up taking away more than you're adding.
We just got a question about this in the Q&A, and this is on my list of topics anyway, so I'm going to talk about it now. But among other things in sports, one of the other interesting things that's happening is we're seeing this big surge of interest in women's sports in particular. The WNBA is having a great period. Netflix just picked up the rights to the Women's World Cup. I remember during the Final Four a couple years ago, I was at a hotel somewhere and went downstairs into the bar, and it was all guys my age kind of jumping up and down and having beers and cheering. And then I looked up and they were watching Caitlin Clark in the Final Four. So it feels to me like there's this real increase in how invested people are. And it's not just the people that you sort of normally see traditionally as fans of women's sports, but just kind of across the board, people are finding things to get engaged about. And I'm wondering, and Michelle, maybe we can start with you on this one, since you're at one of the leagues, but have you noticed that? And to what do you attribute this increase in interest? And does that increase have anything to do with Gen Z, or anything to do with new ways to connect with athletes through technology, do you think?
Yeah, so I would say, I think 2023 was a pivotal year for women's sports. I think this really kind of marked the beginning of the surge that we're witnessing today. And it really started with the rivalry, but the undeniable talent of both Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese during their college careers. And during that year, to your point, the championship, I mean, their championship grew average 18.9 million viewers. That was higher by a sizable amount compared to the men's championship. And this was unheard of. This is the first time the women's championship actually beat the men's championship. And then we also that momentum actually carry on to the next year where, Caitlin Clark was in the championship again. And then when both her and Angel moved on to WNBA, we definitely saw an increase in our viewership. In fact, last season was the most viewed season we've had in 24 years, outperforming both the NHL and MLB regular seasons. And people sit there and say, well, maybe that's because of the Caitlin Clark being the Indiana Fever. But even if you took the Indiana Fever out of the equation, our viewership would still have been up 79% year over year. And so even with the Paige joining our league this year, we just had our new season kickoff last week, and we had the most viewed opening week in 21 years, joined about 1.3 million. So I really think this is just the beginning, and I can't wait to see where this goes. But I think a number of factors have played a role in the surge. I think representation. Women, I think, women growing up playing sports and then seeing themselves on television, I think has definitely helped drive the viewership. I think to your point, technology, having greater access to the players, and be able to follow the players, get to know the players on a different and more personal level. I think all of this plays a role. And I also think too, like I said earlier, the political climate, the way that the how sports provide some escapism, and just kind of bringing light to people's lives. I think all of that has been playing a role into driving the viewership for women's sports in general.
Yeah, it's been really exciting and interesting to see this surge in recent years. And I think beyond just the actual games being consumed more, just the increase in social engagement around it, the increase in brands being interested in being around it, and the opportunities that opens up for different storytelling. I think I've been at Whistle for like 12 years, and I've been really happy and pleasantly surprised to see in the last 3 or 4 years how our formats and longer form storytelling and podcasts and conversations are really clicking that much more within the women's sports space, and how much more interest there's been from brands, and hearing some of the stories from these athletes that are becoming that much more prominent now. I don't think that's going to slow down anytime soon. I think with the broader World Cup upcoming, and then even I know it's still a few years out, but with the Olympics, those become bigger opportunities to also spotlight other female athletes beyond the WNBA and other sports. So I don't think there's any reason to see that momentum slow down anytime soon. I think we saw a ton coming out of the NCAA tournament a few years ago, and it has really sustained itself.
And I think the distribution and the reach for these sports are going to grow. So like the WNBA next year is going to have a much wider distribution model, where now instead of being on CBS Sports, we're going to be on CBS. And I think you're going to start seeing more women's sports having greater presence and on these bigger networks and streaming platforms, which will then increase the reach and awareness of the sports itself.
I think we're also getting to a point where culturally we're getting a crossover. So certainly, and we discussed this when I was at school, or it was a very long time ago, but girls played netball and hockey, and boys played football, soccer, and rugby, and that was it. That was it. And then actually what we're getting now is, my wife works, and she teaches cricket. She works in a girls' school, cricket, rugby, football, and actually, because that's gone on for a certain amount of time, what you're seeing now is the quality is so much better, because people have been playing since school, when that wouldn't have traditionally been a way. So it actually just looks amazing. There's a lot more talent coming through, and then people see on screen, then they get idols, and they go, actually, I can do that. We had the Women's Lions who won the European Cup, and the take-up of girls football went up even further. So you get this momentum that just the talent gets better and better, because people see more of people like them, and they want to go and do it.
So it's almost like a feedback loop, where the little bit of popularity of the sport makes more people interested in play it, which makes more fans, and kind of recirculates through.
Yeah, I believe so.
That makes a lot of sense. It kind of reminds me of like the UFC here in America, where people just watched it because it was like watching Jean-Claude Van Damme in Bloodsport to begin with, but then, and again, through the reality show, like you mentioned with Drive to Survive, people got to appreciate the sport a little bit. And now there's people that train in MMA, and the fandom has risen accordingly. That's really interesting. One thing that a bunch of you mentioned was the way that technology today lets sports become, I mean, they're already part of the culture, but it lets them become more ingrained in the culture and at more sort of points of contact. And Michelle, when we were talking about this before the session, you talked about the NBA strategy, using culture nodes, non-sports sort of cultural influences to drive engagement with the league. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I would say the NBA ecosystem is vast, encompasses a wide range of touch points, such as live games, merchandise, highlights, social media. And, at the league level, I think we're recognized that there are additional, more indirect, non-sports entry points into the ecosystem, such as sneaker culture, sports betting, gaming, a broader pop culture. And we've been leading it more into these cultural nodes to attract audiences who might not otherwise engage with the NBA. So I think when we focus on those sports concentrated touch points, we're really speaking to people who already have interest in the NBA. And so like you could consider them like your core viewers, but if you actually want to grow your audience, you have to reach the non-NBA viewers in a different way. So like, for example, what we've been doing, and I don't know if, I'm sure you guys might have seen it, we're actually appealing to our fashion forward fans by sharing videos on social media of the players arriving into the arenas, showcasing their personal style through their clothing and footwear. We've been talking about NBA 2K. That was a gateway for gamers who may not have been initially fans of the NBA. And to Darcy's point, has been actually forming that connection between the league and the gamers just by having NBA 2K. And then we're also seeing a strong correlation with sports betting and engagement with our brand. So we're kind of trying to find different touch points that have a somewhat indirect connection to NBA, and then somehow speak to them and bring those fans into the ecosystem and kind of grow our audience base.
I think that's super interesting. And to me, that's one of the things that's the biggest difference for sports and other kinds of media, is that all of this, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities, but also the leagues and the broadcasters to some extent are leaning in instead of being sort of crippled by these competitions. Like my son and I are huge Eagles fans. My wife, until a few years ago, didn't really know anything at all about football, but now she sees us watch, and then she loves Jason Kelsey's wife's podcast. And like the next thing you know, like there's an Amazon package showing up with like Eagles valve stems for her truck, and apparently we're all going to go to Philly for Thanksgiving this year to watch them play the Bears. I found out. But it strikes me that there's all these opportunities to get, like, she never would have become a football fan, or definitely not an Eagles fan, if it wasn't for these new ways of contacting people. And I bet you guys might all have something to say about this, but Joe, like looking at some of the content that your company's produced, some of the branded content, especially, it seems like you guys have recognized that potential and are kind of leaning in on it. And I wondered if you had any insights or any success stories about the ability of that kind of content to bring in people that wouldn't have been fans otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've tried to consistently cast a wide net on storytelling and what happens sort of in the gaps in between the actual moments on the court and the field. And I feel like we've seen a nice uptick in that continuing to kind of resonate more, whether it's through original or branded content. And I think brands have kind of been more comfortable leaning into that element in recent years, because there's a little more flexibility when you're telling stories in that way, because you're not just locked to highlights or moments or sort of repeatable moments that would happen in any, sort of game or contest. So the ability to kind of expand both with original and brands to other elements of individuals that are involved tangentially to the game or things that are going on around the actual competition has been something that we've kind of consistently done more of. And I don't think that's going to change. And I think that's an element of what we wrap around the live rights that DAZN has globally.
We've got a few minutes left here, and if anybody has any questions, we'd love to hear from you now. You can put them in the Q&A. I've got a couple more on my own while we're waiting. Michelle, the NBA is a global brand, and we've already heard, from Matt some of the differences between engaging with fans here or engaging with fans overseas. And there's challenges, but there's also big opportunities because there's a big, an untapped market there of brand new viewers that maybe haven't been as exposed to the sport as much as people in the U.S. have. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage a global brand, but also, it's the global NBA, but then also sort of recognizing what the fans in different regions are interested in and how to connect with them, to the extent that you're able to maybe talk about your strategy or some principles of how you do that might be interesting to the group.
Yeah. So I think like right now we're tasked with actually building that connection with our international fans, knowing that basketball is an American sport and knowing that the NBA is an American league. I think one key strategy is leveraging the growing presence of international talent in the league. Currently, there are 125 international players representing 43 countries. I mean, this is the most that we've ever seen in NBA history. And so what we do, we kind of tap into the pride fans feel for their homegrown players and then use that connection to drive engagement with both the team and the league. And we've seen this pride try to translate into increased viewership. For example, when you look at Europe, France and Serbia are our two most engaged and highest viewed European markets, largely due to Wembanyama and Jokic. And when you look at the individual markets and at the teams that rank the highest, obviously for France, Spurs ranks the highest. And obviously for Serbia, the Nuggets also rank the highest. So we're kind of using the international players as one way to get them in. Another way how we're really building these connections with these international fans is actually bringing the games directly to them. I think Joe mentioned that earlier in the session. We have a bunch of global games. So in this upcoming year, we're actually bringing the Knicks to Abu Dhabi. There's going to be 2 games in China, and then we're going to have a couple of games in Berlin and London. And last year, when we hosted the global game in France, we actually brought Wemby back to play in France, and that game we saw 174% increase in viewership in France, and it was the most watched NBA game in the country's history. So I think beyond global games and the international players, we're also building a strong international presence by establishing and actually having NBA retail stores across the globe. So right now, if you were to go to Abu Dhabi, China, Japan, India, Philippines, and even Indonesia or the UK, you will actually see some of our retail stores in the most populated areas within those countries. And that helps to kind of bring fandom and brand visibility across the world.
And would you say that all the new ways there are to connect with individual people now, like social media especially, do you think that makes it, how much easier does that make it for a brand like the NBA to expand?
That makes it easier. And I think that helps, globalism regarding our brand and everyone else's brand, because now you're kind of building down the wall, you're tearing down the walls, and you're actually giving people the same access regardless of where you live in this world. So I think for us, social media has been a huge help to actually helping to build our brand and grow our awareness on a global level. And I remember, I think a funny story, I was in Paris 2 years ago and I was in Starbucks, and I don't mean to be like looking at someone else's phone, but the guy in front of me, he was on the NBA app and trying to look at all the different stats for different players. And I looked at him and I actually had to start a conversation with him because I think I was so intrigued that here I am in Paris in Starbucks and a French guy is all engaged in the NBA app and he's telling me how much he loves the NBA. And I think it's because he has full access to it through social media. And then with the games going to Paris, I think we're just trying to make it as accessible as possible for all of our fans.
The streaming's always been the equalizer for sports. So I'll go the other way. We did cricket a long time ago. An expat sitting in Silicon Valley or wherever they were could never watch a match. And all of a sudden streaming became available. And I think Matt said it earlier, it didn't have to have 10 million people in the US watching it to get on the deck of the broadcaster. Just had to have people clicking on a app to watch it. And that's what happened. And it suddenly now you got the smaller bite-sized IPL things and things going on cricket. I'm not a cricket fan, but that sport blew up globally because there was interest, and they just never got to see it before. Like the NBA, going the other way. think all sports have an opportunity through streaming. Get highlights out there, get digital packages out there. It doesn't cost you much. Put them on those, streaming, put them on these networks that, carry the streams, and you're going to get an audience, and especially if you can throw that bite-sized stuff out there. I just looked at the stats for NBA 2K and internationally this week, and there was 835 significant streamers that got 841,000 hours of viewing for the game. Why not be on there and talk about, that there's an interest, obviously. That's a lot of consumption of a lot of games for NBA 2K over that's 1 week. So it's, you got to be in the places where the viewers are, and don't spend all that, I know this stuff's fun doing the games, throwing the NFL game in London or doing those things. You got to do that too, but that's expensive and one time. Get out there persistently in games, I think is interesting, with highlights as well.
One more question from the audience here, I think is interesting. It says, so I've noticed that as the younger audiences grow up or become mature adults, their habits appear to change back into some traditional habits that were thought to have gone away. I'm guessing he's referring to, or he or she is referring to, linear TV. Do you guys have any concerns about that, and how it might affect your strategy in the future? So basically, are these trends we're seeing when it comes to Gen Z's behavior of how they consume content and how they engage, is there any likelihood that as they get older and they have kids and a mortgage that they're going to revert to watching linear TV and cable TV again? I have a strong opinion about this, but what do you guys think?
Genie's out of the bottle. I don't think nobody's going back to linear. Sorry.
I think you'll have a mix of still have a mix of both. For it depends. It's because it's very difficult to see at the moment, because that you have a mixture of houses where you have parents who have been brought up with that big screen in the middle, and then you have their kids have been brought up different that we're talking about now. When those children become the parents, are they likely to go back and go, okay, now I'm old enough to sit back and watch TV again? I don't believe that will happen. I think it's just a shift in the way people engage with sport. You will still, I don't see, you really want to watch sport if you really like that sport and only want to watch the game. If the screen sizes, you do want a big screen, because if you're a sports fan, you want to be in the stadium. That's it. If you want to be in front of a big screen, if you just want to watch, the editorial from a broadcaster, and then you will watch it alongside. But I still think there will be a big screen experience.
I agree with you. I think there will be a big screen experience, but it'll never go back to the time when that was like the only way that people watch. Now that it's going to be one of a constellation of ways that they engage, I think.
Yeah.
I see Steve has come on, which I think means that we have reached the end of our time. So I really appreciate you guys spending the time on this panel. This has been great. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure the audience did as well.
Yeah. This was a great conversation. Thank you all so much. This is
thank you.
Fantastic. Great questions too from the audience. Obviously, really engaged. So before we go, I do want to have a shout out to Warren Campbell, who was the first to correctly identify Higher Ground by Stevie Wonder, who just turned 75 last week, as the music we heard when we were coming in. So Warren, you will receive an email in a week or so telling you how to claim your prize. And we'll be back in half an hour at 11:30 Eastern Time, 8:30 Pacific Time for Publishers Pay to Play Free. Next steps in ad-based streaming monetization. So I hope everyone will join us for that. So thanks again for a great panel.
Thanks very much. Nice to meet you guys.
Bye.